Hello BookTube, it's Ros, back to do a Tag for Tag Tuesday. Seems to have become like a kind of about a monthly thing for me, but that's fine, isn't it? I'm really happy to be back doing one of the alphabet tags created by Jim of Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff. And he's done the S tag, which of course I had to do, and he kindly tagged me because my channel name's Scallydandling about the books. And in terms of who's tagged to do this by me, I will say now, if you have an S in your name or an S in your channel name, or you've read a book by someone whose name begins with S, or from a country whose name begins with S, feel free to do this tag. It's a goodie. Now, one of the lovely things that Jim says with his alphabet tags is that he gives us a little kind of smorgasbord of prompts, but invites us to pick the ones that appeal to us, and we can always slip in a few of our own if we fancy. And I'm really taking him up on that flexibility this time, because I thought to myself, I want to do a Scallydandling version of this tag for myself. Now, what do I mean by that? You will know if you watch this channel regularly. Scallydandling for me is about reading books from different countries, different parts of the world, from the UK where I live. And so this year I've read things from, I think, 35 different countries, authors from 35 different countries, of which about 9 were new countries to me, because the other element of the Scallydandle for me is my long-term project to try and read something by an author from every country in the world. And I'm going on a list of 195 countries, and I've done 165 so far, so I've got 30 to go. Those 30 left to go, 7 happen to begin with an S. Now, I then thought I'm going to make this extra tricky for myself, okay, by trying to make sure that all my S answers are either from a country beginning with S, an author from a country beginning with an S, or an author whose first or last name begins with S, or a book that has an S at the front of one of the words in the title. So see how I get on, okay? Now, Jim's first tag is S's for science fiction. And his first prompt, rather, his prompt for that is which science fiction author have you read the most of? And that would probably be Ursula Le Guin for me, I think. But rather than think about that, I sort of thought, what science fiction have I read in the course of my kind of Scallydandles? And I realised not that much. And it's not that I deliberately avoid it, but I wonder if not so much has been translated. I don't know. But it does so happen that I did read one just a couple of months ago, which was The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, beginning with S, the Zambian author. Now, in that case, I have to say that I wish I had realised before I embarked on the book that it was essentially a science fiction book, because the element of science fiction became more pronounced in the latter part of the book, and I think I would have found those sections more satisfying if I hadn't been kind of caught by surprise by the science fiction element. So it's a book that I would only recommend if you're aware that it's going to be more science fiction than the kind of family historical fiction epic you might think it's going to be, and then you might enjoy it more than I did. Now, another of Jim's lovely prompts is S's for school story, your favourite book with a school setting. And this one was no problem, because actually one of my favourite books with a school setting is by a French Rwandan author called Scholastique Mukasonga. And she wrote a book called Our Lady of the Nile, and it's set in a boarding school in Rwanda. So it is a school story, and a story about kind of teenage girls and relationships growing up and getting on or not getting on, and the odd things that happen in that enclosed world of a school. But it is also a book that is, the story foreshadows the Rwandan genocide, which was going to come sort of soon after when the book is set. So Scholastic Mukasonga wrote it in 2012, I think. Yeah. So it's a book. It's a strong recommendation from me, that as a book that is interesting about Rwanda, but is also a very well written book and a school story. Another of Jim's prompts is Essays for Satire, your favourite satirical novel. Now, with a sort of open choice, I could have picked all sorts of things as a favourite satirical novel, but fortunately, one of my absolute favourite satirical novels, it fits very nicely with essays, because it's The Good Soldier Svejk by Jaroslav Hašek. Hašek, I think, yeah, Hašek, that's right. Which was written in the 1920s. Hašek is a Czech author, and Good Soldier Svejk is very funny, but also biting satire about World War I and the Austro-Hungarian army and its part in that war. And Svejk is this sort of anti-hero who's stuck in the army and doing his best to carve the safest path for himself out of it that he can. It's a classic of Czech literature, and again, a warm recommendation, that one. If you haven't read it, you really should. And it has great little pictures in it too. And it's a super satirical novel. But I thought if I was going to give you a Czech satirical novel, I better give you a Slovak one as well, as this is the S tag. And fortunately, there's an excellent one which I can recommend, and that's Rivers of Babylon by Peter Pišt'anek. Now, he wrote it in 1991, so just at the point when what was then Czechoslovakia was sort of the Soviet control was crumbling. At the time of the Velvet Revolution, that's when it's set, and it's, goodness, how to describe this book? Oh, I should say it wasn't published in English until relatively recently, about probably got it written down, 2008, and it should have been published much sooner, because it's a satire on both communism and capitalism, and because it's set at that sort of point when communism came to an end. But again, it has an anti-hero, and this anti-hero is a sort of Slovak peasant, as it were, who comes to the city, to Bratislava, and becomes the stoker for the boiler in a communal block of flats, the communal boiler, central heating. And the boiler breaks down, and he realizes through that he can actually control the lives of the people in the building and make money out of this by the fact that he controls the heating, the energy supply in this building. And from that he builds this kind of grubby gangster-like empire. It's bitingly satirical. It's also funny. It's not a well-known book, and I don't really understand why. I'd certainly recommend it if you're up for some sort of good just post-communist satire. Well, now, Jim has included in this tag one of his wonderful log cabin prompts, and I kind of apologise for not doing that, but it doesn't really fit with the Scallydandling sort of thing. But if you do the tag, I'll put both my prompts and the rest of Jim's in the show notes. Okay. But the next of Jim's prompts that I'm coming to is Essays for Scotland. Now, and he asked for our favourite book set in Scotland. Well, right now, my favourite book set in Scotland is one that I've read really recently, and that's Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stuart, which fits very nicely with my S efforts, doesn't it? But it's no good as a Scallydandling choice, because Scotland is not an independent country. They may be, It wouldn't surprise me now if the Scots do eventually go for independence from the rest of the United Kingdom, particularly post Brexit. But as it stands, it isn't. So, but there are, in my 195 countries, there are actually 26 that begin with S, would you believe? It's interesting how different letters are more common as country names, partly because Saint begins with S, and a few of them are like, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Anyway, and I've read 20 of those so far. Now, I thought I should pick, instead of S is for Scotland, a really S-y one. So I'm going to say S is for South Sudan. Relatively new country, and the book that I've read, and I've only read one book from South Sudan, is Beneath the Darkening Sky, which came out in 2012 by Majok Tulba, and Tulba became a refugee from South Sudan, but he grew up there, and this book it's his reimagining, he's imagining the life that he would have had if he had been just a few inches taller on the day that the South Sudanese rebel army came to his home village and selected boys to become boy soldiers. And he was just short enough not to be picked that day. So he's written a heartfelt book about the lives of teenage soldiers in wars, in civil wars, and in the South Sudanese conflict. It's one of those books that is depressing but necessary, if you know what I mean. So I kind of hesitate to recommend it because it's very much not a fun read, but I found it a worthwhile one. Another of Jim's prompts is S is for superhero, and he asks for your favourite superhero. I'm not a huge superhero fan person myself, but in the course of my kind of Scallydandle struggles to find books from some countries where there are limited options, I have ended up reading some things that would not be obvious Ros books, and one of those does have a superhero of sorts. So the book is the book that I read for Samoa, and it's by the Samoan author Lani Wendt Young, and the book is called Telesa, the Covenant Keeper, and basically it's a YA book, and it's YA fantasy romance. Yeah, you can see why it's not really a Rose book. But the main character in this book, Layla, is she has almost like a kind of the classic Superman story of being surprised by finding that she has a latent superpower, which she then has to learn to live with and manage. It's set on Samoa, where Wendt Young comes from. The pleasure of the book for me, not being a fantasy romance YA fan, was the way she draws on Samoan culture, Samoan mythology, and Samoan contemporary life, and brings those things together in the book. So if you are into YA fantasy romance, actually I would say this is an interesting one, and it's the first of a trilogy, I think, but I only read the one. And I think Samoans love the fact that she's really kind of put them on the literary map by writing a really successful fantasy series. Another of Jim's tags is S is for Scandi Noir, and he says, have you tried this subgenre? Yes, I have. That is a subgenre that I've delved into quite thoroughly, I have to say, unlike books with superheroes. And possibly my favourite would be quite an essay one. That's Miss Smiller's Feeling for Snow by Peter Hög from Denmark. But Sweden, this is for Sweden, is a real kind of hot hotbed or heartland of Scandinois writing, isn't it? And Henning Mankell's Wallander books are been hugely successful, haven't they? But I'm going to recommend another series, if you haven't ever read, but you like that kind of thing. This is this is for you. Okay. There was a Swedish couple who wrote 10 books between 1965 and 1975. They were Maj Sherval and Per Valu, and they wrote the books about Martin Beck. And so Beck is a kind of, he almost set the model for the sort of scruffy, slightly chaotic and yet ultimately moral and effective police detective. So, if you like, I don't know, Ian Rankin, say, and his books, well, I've forgotten the name of his main character, so then Valu and Sherval's books, Beck books, are for you. But what they are also, as well as being kind of good police procedurals with a kind of classic grumpy detective, is that they're actually kind of like a Marxist critique of Swedish society of the 60s and 70s. So there's that kind of unexpected extra element, but it's not, perhaps except in a couple of the later books, it's not obvious in a kind of a preachy way. It's there, it's subtly there, but it's definitely there if you're looking for it. Now, that's the last of Jim's prompts that I'm going to do, but I've missed out some of his, so I'm throwing in a couple of my own. And one is S is for sorrow and sadness. Yeah, sorry to bring you down, folks, but I really wanted to recommend, if you've never read it, So Long a Letter, and that's by Miriam Bar from Senegal. So multiple, yes, S's there. She wrote it in 1979, came out in French, and then it's been translated. It was not that long before she died. She had quite an interesting life, but she didn't actually start writing novels until the very end of her life, and she only wrote 2, one of which was published in a lifetime and one subsequently. So Long a Letter is like her turning to the novel to express her frustration with the position of women in Senegalese society. So it's I suppose a diatribe against sort of polygamy and sort of patriarchal Senegalese societal structures. But it also really works as a story. It's semi-autobiographical, but it's written in the form of letters. But it's a woman who's been widowed, and she's writing about her feeling about being widowed, and having to share mourning for her husband with his much younger second wife, and kind of also kind of going over their life together and her life through that. It's a really, really interesting and thoughtful and worthwhile book to read, that has kind of literary virtues but also is just fascinating. If you're a feminist and you're interested in Senegal, read it if you haven't. So my final S prompt is going to is another one for multiple S's, because this one is a simply superb, if strange, book, okay, from Spain, and it's Soldiers of Salamis by Javier Cercas, and it came out in 2001, and it's a book about, it's kind of about the Spanish Civil War, but it's also a book about heroes and villains and propaganda and how we remember recent history. It's a very clever book, very interestingly structured. It blends fact and fiction, and including having a character that is a a fictionalized version of the author himself. And again, it's a book where I would say if you haven't read it and you're interested in books of ideas and you're not afraid of something that is a little bit strangely structured and going to tax your mind a bit, Soldiers of Salamis is another must read from Roz. So do have a go at this tag and do Jim's version, my version, your own version, and I look forward to seeing it.